Welcome to Whispers After Midnight. Tonight, we dive into a story so chilling, it will make you question the very nature of sanity. Before we uncover the horrors of the Moorfield family, the Moorfield family's story begins in the mist-shrouded countryside of 17th century England, a lineage rooted in wealth and influence, yet shadowed by whispers of strange behavior. Historical records show the earliest known Moorfield ancestor, Sir Edmund Moorfield, as a respected landowner and magistrate, feared and admired in equal measure. On the surface, the family appeared prosperous, commanding respect in their village, yet beneath that facade, a darkness festered. The first documented incident of madness within the Moorfield line dates back to 1682, when Sir Edmund's eldest son, Thomas, began exhibiting bizarre behavior that alarmed both the household and the village. Neighbors reported seeing him wandering the estate grounds at night, muttering incomprehensible phrases to shadows that seemed to follow him. Servants whispered about unexplained sounds, faint screams, the clanging of heavy objects, and the echo of footsteps in empty corridors. What struck historians as particularly chilling was the nature of Thomas's episodes. He would alternate between sudden fits of rage and long periods of catatonic silence, often staring for hours at corners of rooms where nothing seemed to exist. Local clergy were called in, and while prayers and exorcisms were attempted, nothing appeared to help. In some letters preserved from that time, Thomas described visions of ancestral faces, distorted and screaming, accusing him of sins he did not remember committing. This first incident would set a terrifying precedent for the Moorfield family. It was not a single occurrence. It was the beginning of a pattern, a hereditary madness that seemed to skip generations but never truly disappeared. Scholars who studied the family centuries later suggested that a combination of genetic predisposition, inherited trauma, and possibly dark rituals performed by earlier ancestors may have contributed to these early signs of insanity. Even today, the accounts of Thomas Moorfield's behavior evoke a lingering uneasy, a family of outwardly respectable figures, yet haunted from within by a darkness that seemed almost sentient. The origins of the Moorfield madness were not just personal. They were ancestral, embedded into the very bloodline, ensuring that the shadows of the past would never release their grip. As the Moorfield family grew, so too did the darkness that seemed to run through their veins. Historical accounts reveal a disturbing pattern. Generations of Moorfields were prone to sudden, inexplicable violent outbursts, often triggered by seemingly trivial events. It was as if an invisible force lurked inside them, waiting for a moment to erupt. One of the earliest documented cases involved Sir Edmund's grandson, Jonathan Moorfield, in the early 1700s. Jonathan had been described by neighbors as charming yet volatile. He could move from laughter to fury within seconds. Records show that during a routine family dinner, he suddenly lashed out, striking servants and guests without provocation. Witnesses later claimed that his eyes blazed with an unnatural fire, and that he spoke in a voice that was not entirely his own, hissing threats that seemed centuries old. This pattern did not end with Jonathan. Over the decades, Moorfields across multiple generations displayed similar behaviors, children attacking siblings without warning, young adults destroying property in fits of rage, and even respected patriarchs turning murderous over minor slights. Some historians speculate that these violent episodes were linked not only to genetic instability, but to the family's obsession with control, secrecy, and power, creating a pressure cooker of repressed rage that eventually exploded in terrifying ways. One particularly chilling story comes from the 1800s, when a distant cousin, Elizabeth Moorfield, reportedly strangled her own horse in the stables during a fit of inexplicable fury. Neighbors recalled that she stood over the lifeless animal for hours, whispering words no one could understand, before quietly returning to the house as if nothing had happened. Such incidents were never publicly discussed, as the family's reputation depended on secrecy. But rumors spread throughout the countryside. Even modern researchers investigating the Moorfield's legacy noted that violent behavior was not isolated. It was cyclical, almost ritualistic. Some suggest that the family may have been cursed, or that their ancestral exposure to dark rituals had left a mark on their descendants, manifesting as uncontrollable rage and aggression. These outbursts were never random. They were a haunting signature of a bloodline steeped in madness. The Moorfields' sudden bursts of violence became so notorious that local law enforcement and clergy often refused to intervene, fearing the family's unpredictable nature. In many ways, this violence was the family's invisible heirloom, passed down alongside estates and titles, a terrifying inheritance that no amount of wealth or privilege could counteract. By the mid-1700s, the Moorfield family's sinister reputation had begun to extend beyond the walls of their estate. Local villages whispered of neighbors, servants, and even distant relatives who vanished under mysterious circumstances, never to be seen again. These disappearances were never officially linked to the family, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Where the Moorfields were involved, people tended to disappear. One of the earliest recorded cases involved a maid named Agnes, who worked in the main Moorfield manor. Agnes was known for her devotion to the family and her sharp mind, but one evening she simply vanished. Servants reported hearing her scream late at night, followed by the sound of running footsteps and a door slamming. When the household was searched at dawn, there was no trace of her except for a single slipper left on the manor steps. Rumors among the villagers claimed they saw strange figures carrying shadows of light into the nearby woods, though no one dared investigate. Over the next decades, disappearances became disturbingly frequent. Young men and women sent to work at the estate or visiting for distant family affairs would vanish without explanation. Some would be found weeks later, disoriented, unable to speak, their eyes wide with unspoken terror, while others were never found at all. Official records often listed these people as runaways or lost, but letters and diaries from the era hint at a far darker truth. Something within the Moorfield estate seemed to feed on human presence, or perhaps the family itself. Even outsiders were not safe. Merchants, travelers, and laborers passing near the Moorfield lands reported seeing eerie lights in the windows at night, accompanied by ghostly figures moving silently across the estate. Those who lingered too long were never heard from again. Some villagers claimed that the disappearances were tied to secretive rituals conducted by the family, rituals meant to bind the family's curse across generations, though no concrete proof ever surfaced. What made these disappearances especially horrifying was their randomness. No one could predict who would vanish next, and no one could confront the Moorfields without risking their own life. It was as if the estate itself had become a living trap, and the family's history of madness was inseparable from the inexplicable vanishings. The shadows of the missing seemed to linger over the estate, adding another layer of fear that would haunt the surrounding countryside for generations. Even today, investigators and paranormal researchers note that the Moorfield lands are marked by mysterious gaps in historical records. People who simply disappeared without trace, their fates forever entwined with the family's dark legacy. As the Moorfield family's reputation for madness and disappearances grew, So did the rumors of sinister activities taking place under the cover of darkness. Neighbors often spoke in hushed tones about strange sights and unsettling noises coming from the Moorfield estate at night. Sounds and visions that defied explanation and chilled the heart of anyone who dared observe. Multiple accounts describe villagers witnessing flickering lights in the manor windows long after midnight. Some claimed they saw the family, or what appeared to be family members, moving in rigid, unnatural patterns across the estate grounds. Shadows danced violently against the walls, as if guided by some unseen hand. At times, these figures were accompanied by faint chanting in languages none of the witnesses could understand, a sound that lingered in the air long after the windows went dark. One particularly unsettling report from 1768 came from a farmer who lived a mile from the estate. He recounted seeing the entire Moorfield family gathered in the main courtyard under the full moon. They were dressed in long, flowing garments, faces hidden beneath dark hoods, and holding strange objects that glimmered in the moonlight. The farmer described the scene as a meeting of shadows pretending to be humans. He swore he saw figures writhe and contort unnaturally, as if pulled by some invisible force. When he tried to approach the next night with a friend, the estate was silent, with no trace that any gathering had occurred. Other villagers reported hearing footsteps in the surrounding woods at impossible speeds, accompanied by low murmurs and eerie laughter. Dogs refused to approach the estate, and livestock became skittish for days after any of these nocturnal events. Some witnesses claimed to see torches moving in intricate circles, forming shapes that resembled ancient symbols, before vanishing suddenly without a trace. These midnight gatherings fueled speculation that the Moorfields were not merely eccentric or mentally unstable. They were engaged in practices so dark and secretive that no outsider could penetrate their purpose. Scholars later suggested that these rituals could have been attempts to invoke power from forces beyond human comprehension, or perhaps ways to channel the family's inherited madness into tangible influence over their surroundings. By the 19th century, tales of these night-time gatherings had become legend. Even those who had never seen the estate firsthand shuddered at the mere mention of the Moorfields. The estate itself seemed alive during these nocturnal rituals, almost as if the very land had absorbed the family's dark energy, amplifying the fear that anyone who ventured too close might become part of the legacy or vanish entirely. In essence, these accounts painted a terrifying image. A family not just haunted by madness, but one that actively embraced and perpetuated it, transforming the estate into a stage for horrors that would ripple across generations. As the Moorfield family's influence and wealth grew over the centuries, so too did the sinister pattern of untimely and mysterious deaths surrounding the inheritance of their fortune. Each passing generation seemed cursed, not by poverty, but by the very riches they were meant to enjoy. The Moorfields' wealth, rather than offering security, became a magnet for tragedy and death, often under circumstances that defied logic and explanation. One of the earliest recorded cases involved Sir Edmund Moorfield's great-grandson, Richard, in the early 18th century. When Richard unexpectedly inherited the family estate and fortune after his father's sudden death, he appeared poised to expand the family's influence. But within 6 months, Richard was found dead in the manor's private study, slumped over his desk with no sign of forced entry or struggle. The coroner's report cited natural causes, but servants whispered that Richard had been seen speaking to shadows in the hallways, seemingly pleading for something or someone to spare him. The pattern repeated through the years. Heirs would come into their inheritance, only to face bizarre accidents, a chandelier falling from nowhere, a carriage veering off the road into a deep ravine, or mysterious fires erupting in the dead of night. In some cases, deaths occurred during family gatherings, leaving witnesses terrified and bewildered. One notorious incident in 1823 involved young Eleanor Moorfield, who inherited a substantial portion of the family fortune after her brother's sudden death. Eleanor was found dead in the manor gardens at dawn, her face frozen in terror, and her body positioned unnaturally, as though she had been forced into the earth by an invisible hand. What made these deaths so haunting was their timing and consistency. No heir ever seemed to enjoy their wealth for long. Letters and diaries from the period indicate a pervasive fear among family members who often made wills in secret or avoided large inheritances altogether. Outsiders speculated on the possibility of a curse, while some suggested that the Moorfields themselves had become instruments of their own doom, with the family's inherited madness somehow steering them toward fatal ends. Even more chilling, servants and neighbors occasionally reported seeing ghostly figures lingering over the deceased, sometimes resembling earlier Moorfield ancestors. It was as if the bloodline itself demanded sacrifice with every new inheritance, binding the family to a cycle of wealth, madness, and death. By the mid-19th century, the connection between the Moorfield fortune and mysterious deaths had become legend. Families in the surrounding villages would warn travelers to steer clear of the estate during any significant inheritance transitions. And for the Moorfields themselves, wealth was never a blessing. It was a reminder of the darkness that had been passed down, as inexorable and merciless as the family bloodline itself. Throughout the Moorfield lineage, certain individuals stand out not only for their prominence, but for the horrifying ways in which madness consumed them. Their stories are stark reminders that within this family, sanity was fleeting, a fragile veneer easily shattered by the darkness embedded in their bloodline. One of the earliest recorded cases involved Jonathan Moorfield, a direct descendant of Sir Edmund. Jonathan was a respected scholar, known for his keen intellect and persuasive charm. Yet, beneath his cultivated demeanor lay a growing instability. Reports suggest that he began hearing voices in his study, whispering threats and revealing secrets that no one outside the family could possibly know. Over time, these hallucinations intensified. Jonathan's journals reveal that he became obsessed with the idea that unseen forces were conspiring against him, eventually leading him to barricade himself in his room for days at a time. By the time he was discovered, he had carved strange symbols into the walls and muttered incoherent prophecies about the family's doom. Another notorious case occurred in the 19th century with Victoria Moorfield, a young heiress renowned for her beauty and social grace. Those closest to her reported sudden mood swings, alternating between radiant charm and violent, unprovoked outbursts. It was said that she spoke to invisible figures at night and claimed they were her ancestors, guiding her or tormenting her toward an unknown purpose. Eventually, Victoria was confined to the family's private wing, where she spent her final years wandering the halls in a daze, her screams echoing through the manor. Perhaps the most chilling account comes from the 20th century, when Edward Moorfield, the last known direct heir, before the estate fell into partial ruin, exhibited symptoms of what modern psychologists might identify as severe psychosis. Edward isolated himself from the world, communicating only with cryptic notes left for the staff. He claimed that the estate itself was alive, whispering secrets to him, and that any attempt to leave would result in death, not just for him, but for his descendants. On several occasions, Neighbors reported seeing Edward roaming the estate grounds at night, speaking frantically to the air, his shadow stretching unnaturally under the moonlight. He ultimately vanished without explanation, leaving the family mansion and its dark legacy behind, yet reinforcing the terrifying notion that insanity was an inescapable inheritance for the Moorfields. These cases are not isolated incidents. They are threads woven into the fabric of the Moorfield lineage. From Jonathan's prophetic madness to Victoria's spectral conversations and Edward's ultimate disappearance, the family demonstrates a chilling continuity. Intelligence, power, and privilege intertwined with an uncontrollable descent into madness. It is as if each generation carried a hidden seed of insanity, lying dormant until circumstances or bloodline pressures brought it to life in horrifying ways. The stories of these Moorfields serve as grim warnings. They are not just tales of mental illness, they are the manifestations of a bloodline cursed by its own history, where genius and madness coexist in a delicate, deadly balance, waiting for the next heir to fall prey. The Moorfield estate itself is as infamous as the family that inhabited it. Perched atop a fog-shrouded hill, the manor looms over the surrounding countryside like a dark sentinel, its stone walls etched with centuries of secrets, madness, and death. To outsiders, it was a grand symbol of wealth and aristocracy. To those who lived nearby or dared to visit, the estate was a place of fear, whispers, and the uncanny. The manor's architecture contributed to its eerie aura. Towering spires cast long, distorted shadows across the grounds, while narrow corridors and hidden chambers created a labyrinthine interior where sounds traveled oddly and echoes seemed to answer back. Windows were often shuttered, yet faint lights could be seen flickering inside at all hours, hinting at life, or something resembling it. Servants over generations reported that certain rooms seemed alive, reacting to footsteps, voices, and even the family's moods. Local lore claims that the estate's curse manifested in tangible ways. During the 18th century, neighbors spoke of gardens overrun with thorny vines that seemed to grow unnaturally fast, blocking paths and entrances. Animals refused to enter the grounds, and the air around the manor was said to carry a subtle, unsettling chill that persisted even in the heat of summer. People reported hearing disembodied whispers near the estate, faint cries of anguish, or the sound of furniture moving on its own. Travelers who passed by after nightfall occasionally saw shadowy figures standing at the windows, staring silently at the road below. The estate's cursed reputation was not merely folklore. Numerous tragedies occurred within its walls, sudden deaths, disappearances, and episodes of violent madness that seemed almost ritualistic. In the 19th century, a historian visiting the manor noted that portraits of Moorfield ancestors seemed to watch guests, their eyes eerily lifelike, and that the air itself felt heavy, as if pressing down on anyone who dared enter. Rooms long abandoned would often show signs of recent activity. Candles burned down to stubs, doors left ajar, and strange symbols carved into the walls. What fueled the fear most was the estate's connection to the family's bloodline. Every incident of madness, every unexplained death, and every disappearance seemed to have a direct link to life at the manor. Some theorists suggested that the estate itself absorbed the family's darkness, a living vessel that perpetuated insanity and death across generations. Paranormal investigators visiting in modern times reported strange electromagnetic readings, sudden drops in temperature, and apparitions of shadowy figures resembling long, dead Moorfields, reinforcing the belief that the manor's sinister energy never dissipated. Even today, the Moorfield estate remains largely uninhabited, yet its legend endures. The locals treat the hilltop manor as sacred ground of terror, a place where history, blood, and madness converge. To enter the estate is to step into a story that refuses to end, where the walls themselves seem to whisper, "Welcome, but beware." The cursed reputation of the Moorfield estate is not just a backdrop, it is a character in its own right, a living testament to a family whose darkness shaped the land itself. Much of what we know about the Moorfield family's inner darkness comes from the chilling letters and diaries preserved through the centuries. These writings, often hidden in secret drawers, behind false panels, or within locked chests, provide a terrifying glimpse into the minds of individuals slowly consumed by madness. They reveal a family trapped in cycles of fear, obsession, and paranoia, an inheritance far more potent than their wealth. One of the most infamous diaries belonged to Thomas Moorfield, a direct descendant in the late 1700s. At first, his entries appeared ordinary, detailing estate management and family matters. But gradually, the tone shifted. Thomas wrote of hearing whispers in empty rooms, shadows moving against the candlelight, and invisible figures that seemed to follow him through the halls. By the final pages, his writing had become almost indecipherable, scrawled in jagged letters that twisted across the paper, filled with frantic warnings about betrayals from within the family itself. Historians examining the diary noted that many passages seemed prophetic, describing violent events that would later occur with eerie accuracy. Another set of letters, exchanged between siblings in the early 1800s, paints a picture of intense paranoia. One letter, written by Eleanor Moorfield to her brother, warns of eyes watching from the walls, and implores him to trust no one, not even our own kin. She claims to have seen family members acting strangely, whispering to themselves and communicating with unseen forces. The letters hint at secretive rituals and growing distrust among family members, suggesting that paranoia was not a mere symptom of madness, it was a driving force that influenced the very structure of the family. These writings also reveal a fascination with death and control. Some diaries describe the careful planning of inheritances, the monitoring of household staff, and the strategic isolation of certain family members, all measures designed to maintain power, but also revealing a mind slowly unraveling. In some cases, Moorfields expressed fear of being claimed by forces they could neither name nor fight, suggesting a belief in a supernatural element to their inherited insanity. What makes these letters and diaries so unsettling is their intimate nature. They allow us to hear the voices of the Moorfields, not through hearsay, but directly from those whose minds were slowly overtaken by darkness. The scrawled notes, fragmented thoughts, and obsessive warnings all point to a family in which paranoia was not occasional, it was constant, inescapable, and transmissible through generations. Even modern scholars studying these documents describe a palpable sense of dread, as if the words themselves carry the weight of the family's curse. Each page seems to whisper the same warning: the Moorfields were not merely victims of madness, they were architects of their own fear, cultivating an environment where insanity could thrive, feeding on suspicion, secrecy, and the shadow of their ancestors' sins. Through these letters and diaries, the legacy of the Moorfields becomes frighteningly clear. Madness was written into their very existence, preserved in ink for future generations to uncover, shudder at, and perhaps never fully escape. The Moorfield family's descent into madness was not merely psychological. It was entwined with whispers of the occult and forbidden knowledge. Across centuries, fragments of letters, diaries, and estate inventories hint at secret collections of ancient texts, rituals, and artifacts that the family acquired, studied, and sometimes used in ways that terrified both servants and neighbors. In the late 1700s, Jonathan Moorfield was rumored to possess a series of arcane manuscripts, handwritten in strange languages, which he kept hidden in the manor's restricted library. Scholars and clergy who caught glimpses described the texts as unholy, filled with instructions for summoning and binding forces beyond human comprehension. The writings seemed to promise power, protection, or insight, but at a horrifying cost. Those who dared study them often experienced madness, illness, or sudden, inexplicable deaths. The family's obsession with the occult appears in several letters. One chilling account describes Thomas Moorfield performing midnight rituals in the manor gardens, arranging candles and symbols in geometric patterns while chanting passages from the forbidden texts. Servants reported hearing the sounds of flailing and shrieking, as if invisible entities were both invoked and enraged by the ceremonies. Other accounts describe objects moving on their own, books thrown from shelves, doors slamming, shadows twisting against the walls, often coinciding with these rituals. Over generations, the Moorfields seemed to believe that these practices were necessary to maintain the family's power and protect the bloodline from some unseen force. Yet the very rituals meant to strengthen them may have deepened the family's insanity. Descendants reported visions of ancestral spirits, voices calling them to perform acts of violence, and compulsions that could not be explained by ordinary psychology. Scholars speculate that the blending of inherited madness and occult experimentation created a feedback loop, amplifying paranoia, hallucinations, and violence. Even neighbors and villagers claimed to witness strange occurrences connected to the family's occult activities. Torches flickering in impossible patterns, chanting echoing across foggy hills, and fleeting shadows glimpsed through manor windows suggested a connection between the Moorfields and powers far beyond human understanding. Some even speculated that the family was attempting to communicate with forces that bound the family line itself, ancient, malevolent entities that demanded obedience in exchange for the promise of influence and longevity. The most disturbing legacy of the Moorfields' involvement in the occult is not just the rituals themselves, but the way these practices permeated the family's identity. Every generation inherited not only wealth and status, but also access to forbidden knowledge, a compulsion toward the supernatural, and a slow, inexorable slide into madness. The occult was not a hobby or curiosity for the Moorfields. It was a binding force, a secret engine driving the family toward horror, death, and a terrifyingly enduring legacy of insanity. Through these connections to occult practices and forbidden texts, the Moorfields became a family whose very bloodline seemed intertwined with forces far darker than the world could explain, a lineage where curiosity, ambition, and madness collided with the supernatural, leaving a trail of terror that still echoes through history. The Moorfield estate has long been notorious not just for the family's madness, but for the eerie, inexplicable phenomena that plague its halls. Over the centuries, neighbors, visitors, and even the family's own servants reported a variety of strange occurrences, sounds and sights that defy explanation and continue to fuel the manliest chilling reputation. One of the earliest documented incidents comes from the 18th century, when a visiting clergyman recorded in his diary that he heard footsteps pacing the corridors above, yet the upper floor was empty. The noises often began late at night, creaks, thuds, muffled whispers, and faint laughter echoing through rooms long abandoned. Servants who worked overnight in the manor swore that doors slammed on their own, chandeliers swayed without wind, and the distinct sound of dragging chains could be heard in the middle of the night. Some claimed that these sounds were accompanied by sudden cold drafts, so severe that candles would flicker or extinguish entirely. Apparitions were reported with equal frequency. In the late 1800s, a governess named Margaret claimed to see a pale figure in the manor's east wing, a tall man in 18th century attire, walking silently among the halls before vanishing into a wall. Others reported glimpsing shadowy figures at the edges of their vision, always watching, always disappearing when confronted directly. Some apparitions were far more sinister, translucent forms that screamed or writhed in apparent agony, leaving witnesses traumatized. Interestingly, these phenomena often coincided with periods of family crisis. Witnesses noted that noises, apparitions, and unexplained activity intensified whenever a Moorfield heir inherited property, suffered illness, or experienced emotional turmoil. Some historians speculate that the manor itself may have absorbed the family's violent and obsessive energy, acting as a vessel for the psychic imprint of generations consumed by madness. The house seemed alive, responding to fear, grief, and anger as if sentient. Modern paranormal investigators who have visited the estate report similar phenomena. Electromagnetic anomalies, sudden drops in temperature, and inexplicable movements of objects are frequently recorded. Security cameras and motion sensors sometimes capture fleeting shadows, and audio recordings reveal faint voices that cannot be explained by natural causes. Even today, the manor continues to resist full exploration. Rooms remain off limits due to structural instability, yet also because of the lingering dread tied to unexplained occurrences. The reports of noises and apparitions have contributed to Moorfield Manor's lasting legacy of terror. Unlike other haunted estates, where stories fade over time, Moorfield's disturbances seem ongoing, bridging centuries of human history with the supernatural. It is a place where madness and fear are tangible, where every creak, whisper, and shadow serves as a reminder that the Moorfields' dark legacy is not confined to the living. They left behind echoes that refuse to die. Over the centuries, the Moorfield family's descent into madness drew attention from both medical professionals and clergy, yet every intervention seemed destined to fail. Physicians, psychiatrists, and spiritual leaders alike attempted to confront the family's inexplicable behavior, but the results were often terrifying, rather than therapeutic, highlighting the inescapable nature of the Moorfields' curse. In the late 1700s, after a particularly violent episode involving Jonathan Moorfield, local doctors were called to assess him. At first, they approached the situation as a case of mental instability, prescribing strict routines and dietary regimens. Yet, even the most rational treatments seemed powerless. Jonathan's violent outbursts intensified, and he reportedly screamed about voices only he could hear, insisting that, "The shadows command me." One doctor who attempted to restrain him reportedly collapsed in terror after seeing Jonathan's eyes seemingly shift unnaturally, glowing in the candlelight. Clergy, too, were brought in to perform exorcisms or spiritual interventions. Priests and ministers attempted to cleanse the estate of its darkness, performing prayers, blessings, and holy rites in hopes of restoring peace. Some clergy reported hearing laughter, whispers, and the sounds of movement that no one in the manor could explain. One priest recounted that a ritual conducted in the main hall ended abruptly when candles extinguished simultaneously and the room became icy cold, as if the estate itself rejected the intervention. The priest left, shaken, and warned the villagers that the Moorfields' affliction was beyond any ordinary spiritual remedy. Even medical advancements in the 9th century proved ineffective. Physicians attempted more systematic approaches, including confinement, sedatives, and observational treatments. Yet the Moorfields continued to descend into paranoia, hallucinations, and violent behavior. Records note that family members sometimes spoke in multiple voices, claimed to see ancestors or unknown entities, and described compulsions they could not resist. Doctors were baffled, leaving many to conclude that this was not ordinary madness. It was something far more sinister, something perhaps tied to the family's bloodline itself. Attempts to intervene often came at a personal cost. Several clergy and doctors who devoted themselves to understanding the Moorfields reportedly left the estate permanently disturbed, some succumbing to mysterious illnesses or psychological breakdowns. It was as if proximity to the Moorfields' darkness exacted a price, a warning that the family's insanity was contagious, or that the estate's malevolent energy could reach beyond its walls. These failed interventions reinforced the terrifying reality the Moorfields' madness was neither purely medical nor purely spiritual. It was intrinsic to their lineage. No prayers, no potions, no rational explanation could undo the legacy encoded in their blood. Every effort to fix the family only revealed the depth of the curse, proving that the Moorfields' terror was as eternal as it was inevitable. The Moorfield curse was not confined to a single individual or generation. It stretched its shadow across centuries, leaving a trail of insanity, death, and despair in its wake. Descendants of the family often inherited more than wealth and status. They inherited an almost tangible darkness that shaped their lives from birth. Children were the first to show signs of the curse. Historical records from the 18th and 19th centuries describe Moorfield infants who cried incessantly, refused to sleep, or exhibited violent tendencies at a very young age. As they grew, many became prone to paranoia, hallucinations, and obsessive behaviors. Families in the surrounding villages whispered that the Moorfield children were born with the shadow of the hill upon them, suggesting that the curse was not just genetic, it was spiritual, tied to the land and the family estate. The curse also influenced marriage, inheritance, and social interactions. Many Moorfields remained isolated, either by choice or by fear that their madness would harm others. Arranged marriages often failed, with spouses reporting erratic, violent, or bizarre behavior. Those who married into the family sometimes experienced strange phenomena themselves, visions, nightmares, and even unexplained illnesses, leading some to abandon the family entirely. The psychological effects of the curse became more pronounced as heirs reached adulthood. Several generations showed a striking pattern of creative brilliance intertwined with dangerous instability. Some became accomplished scholars, writers, or artists, yet their work was often overshadowed by obsession, delusion, or self-destructive tendencies. Others were consumed by violent outbursts, leading to untimely deaths or tragic scandals. In every case, the family's legacy was a constant reminder. Genius and madness were inseparable within the Moorfield bloodline. Even those who attempted to escape the estate or live normal lives were not free. Many accounts suggest that the curse followed the Moorfields beyond the manor walls. Letters, journals, and oral histories indicate that descendants frequently suffered inexplicable illnesses, accidents, or encounters with the supernatural. Shadows, whispers, and fleeting apparitions continued to appear, as if the family's inherited darkness demanded acknowledgement and submission. By the 20th century, the impact of the Moorfield curse was undeniable. Even distant relatives who had abandoned the estate or changed their surnames reported strange dreams, feelings of being watched, and compulsions they could not explain. Scholars and paranormal researchers studying the family concluded that the curse was more than folklore. It was a persistent, multi-generational force, shaping the Moorfields, lives in ways science and medicine could not account for. The curse's impact is perhaps most terrifying in its inevitability. Each generation was born into a legacy of fear, mistrust, and instability. Wealth, education, and privilege offered no protection. The Moorfield bloodline was a cage, and its inherited darkness a prison, ensuring that the family's story of madness and terror would continue generation after generation, whisper after whisper, inescapable and eternal. Even as centuries have passed, the Moorfield family's dark legacy has not faded. Modern investigators, paranormal researchers, historians, and even curious thrill seekers have returned to the estate and surrounding lands, hoping to document the lingering evidence of the family's infamous curse. What they discovered suggests that the horrors of the Moorfields are far from confined to the past. The estate and its descendants continue to be touched by inexplicable forces. Paranormal teams visiting the estate report sudden drops in temperature, often localized to certain rooms, where their instruments detect fluctuations that defy natural explanation. Motion sensors capture fleeting shadows crossing hallways, while security cameras pick up ghostly figures resembling long-dead family members. In some cases, investigators report hearing whispers in languages that cannot be recognized, faint cries for help, or even laughter echoing through this long echoing. After they've left, one team claimed that digital recordings of the estate captured distorted voices, reciting phrases that eerily match diary entries of 18th-century Moorfields. Local residents continue to share their own unsettling experiences. Some report seeing figures staring from the manor windows late at night. Others speak of objects moving on their own, mysterious lights appearing in the fog surrounding the estate, and inexplicable sounds in the woods nearby. Occasionally, hikers or visitors to the area experience sudden feelings of dread, nausea, or disorientation, as though the very land is rejecting them. These stories reinforce the chilling notion that the Moorfield curse is not limited to blood alone. It extends to the estate itself, and perhaps even to anyone who comes too close. Historians studying the Moorfields note that modern descendants, even those living far from the manor, have reported strange compulsions, vivid nightmares, and uncanny coincidences reminiscent of the family's infamous past. One distant relative described recurring visions of the estate, seeing shadowy figures and hearing whispers warning of imminent danger, despite never having visited the property. This has led some researchers to speculate that the curse may be woven not just into the family's environment, but into their very genetic memory, manifesting across generations in ways science cannot yet explain. Even official investigations into unexplained deaths and disappearances near the estate have failed to provide answers. Law enforcement records occasionally note cases of missing persons or mysterious deaths, but local authorities often consider the incidents anomalies, leaving the unsettling patterns largely unacknowledged. The legend, however, persists, amplified by eyewitness accounts and modern technology capturing glimpses of the inexplicable. Ultimately, the Moorfield legacy is a chilling testament to the endurance of a family curse. Despite the passage of centuries, the estate and its descendants remain entangled in darkness. Madness, tragedy, and the supernatural continue to echo through the halls of the manor and the lives of those connected to the family. The Moorfield story reminds us that some legacies are not written in ink, but in blood and shadow, whispering across generations with a terrifying persistence that refuses to die.